Did you know that in 1850, a woman could spend up to 40 hours a week just doing laundry, without electricity or running water? What did women actually do all day in the 19th century, when they couldn't vote, couldn't work most jobs, and rarely left the house? And how did some of them turn that confined life into quiet rebellion that would one day change history? Picture this. It's sunrise in rural Pennsylvania, 1872. The firewood needs chopping. The butter must be churned. 6 children need to be fed, before 8 a.m. No dishwasher. No microwave. No daycare. Just one woman, running an entire household like a silent engine. This isn't just a history lesson. It's a window into a world we've almost forgotten. Stay with me, because every detail will challenge what you think you know about women's lives in the 19th century. Imagine waking up at 4:30 a.m. Not because you have to beat traffic or check emails, but because the fire has gone out, and without it, your entire home is an icebox. That was the daily reality for countless women in the 19th century. Before their children opened their eyes or their husbands stirred from bed, women were already at work. The first task? Stoke the hearth. Without central heating, the fireplace was the life source of the home. A woman might start her day with frozen fingers, kneeling in front of the hearth to bring the flames back to life, so the family wouldn't shiver through breakfast. Then came the bread, not sliced, not store-bought, homemade, kneaded by hand, and left to rise near the fire she'd just reignited. Water had to be hauled from a well or pump, heated on the stove, and used for everything: boiling oats, washing hands, cleaning floors. Breakfast wasn't bacon and eggs waiting in the fridge. It was a production: oats stirred slowly, coffee brewed in a tin pot, and cornbread baked from scratch. Laundry day? That was a full-body workout. Women boiled water over an open fire, scrubbed clothes on a washboard, wrung them out by hand, then hung them to dry, no matter the season. And when that was done, the mending began. Socks with holes, buttons gone missing, hems coming loose. Everything had to be fixed, often by candlelight, after all the chores were finished. One woman in a Pennsylvania diary from 1847 wrote, "Today I did the wash, baked 6 loaves, and patched trousers before dinner." That wasn't extraordinary. That was normal. And yet, so much of this work was invisible. It wasn't praised, it wasn't paid, and it wasn't optional. But in this daily rhythm, quiet, relentless, and unseen, women built the very foundation their families stood on. If there's one thing we can take away from their mornings, it's this: labor doesn't need to be loud to matter. Their strength wasn't in speeches, it was in the repetition, the consistency, the care. But life wasn't all chores and duty. Even in these long days, women found moments of connection, community, and sometimes even joy. So how did they keep their spirits alive? Let's step outside the home and into the world of church gatherings, quilting bees, and front porch conversations. After the morning rush, fires lit, breakfast cooked, children dressed, the real work had only just begun. The rest of the day belonged to the house. And in the 19th century, a house was more than a place to live. It was a living, breathing machine that needed constant care. And women were the ones keeping it running. There were no cleaning services, no takeout dinners, no shortcuts. Everything had to be made, maintained, and mended, by hand, by habit, and usually, by one woman. She preserved fruit in glass jars before winter, dried herbs from the garden, and churned butter until her arms ached. She made soap from animal fat and lye. And when the soap ran out, she made more. Floors were swept daily, then scrubbed on hands and knees with vinegar and water. And just when she thought she had a moment to sit, someone called for her: a toddler crying, a neighbor needing help, or a husband asking for supper. And dinner wasn't quick. It was a stew slow cooked over a wood fire, vegetables peeled and chopped, meat sometimes hunted and prepared earlier that week. Every meal was the result of hours of invisible planning: soaking beans overnight, keeping flour dry, kneading dough just right. Even leisure was productive. Women knitted socks, sewed dresses, embroidered handkerchiefs, not for art, but out of necessity. Every item of clothing had to be made or repaired. Nothing was wasted. Even candle stubs were melted down to form new ones. There was no applause, no paycheck, just the expectation that everything would be done, and done well. And yet, within that invisible labor, there was love. A patched shirt meant someone cared enough to fix it. A hot meal on the table was more than food, it was warmth. Protection. Devotion. These women were not just keeping homes, they were holding lives together. The lesson? Not all power looks like power. Sometimes, it looks like folding clothes before anyone wakes up, or quietly noticing when someone's had a hard day, and bringing them tea. Without being asked. But while much of their time was spent inside, women weren't cut off from the world. Their hands may have been busy, but their minds were sharp, and they craved connection. So where did they go to feel seen? To feel heard? To feel part of something bigger? Let's walk with them into the church halls, sewing circles, and front porches where stories were shared, and silent bonds were built. For women in the 19th century, life could feel endlessly repetitive, churning, baking, cleaning, sewing, but even amid all that work, one thing remained deeply human: the need to connect. Community wasn't a luxury, it was a lifeline. Every Sunday, women put on their best dresses, often handmade, passed down or carefully mended, and walked, sometimes miles, to church. It wasn't just about religion, it was about people. Church was one of the only public spaces where women could gather openly. It was where they caught up on news, shared recipes, prayed for sick neighbors, and, sometimes, learned that someone needed help, whether with a sick baby or a barn raising. Outside of church, women built their own informal networks, quilting bees, sewing circles, and afternoon visits that didn't require an invitation. These weren't idle gatherings, they were places of quiet power, where women passed down traditions, shared stories, and offered each other the emotional support that their daily lives rarely allowed room for. Imagine a group of women gathered in a parlor, each with a square of fabric on her lap. They chat, stitch, laugh, children play nearby, and slowly, the pieces come together into one quilt, a symbol of warmth, unity, and shared effort. Sometimes, those quilts were gifts for newlyweds. Other times, they were auctioned to raise money for a neighbor in need. Always, they were made with care. Even simple front porch conversations held weight. Sitting together, rocking in silence, sipping tea, it was enough. Words didn't always have to fill the space. Presence was its own kind of comfort. And in a world where women were expected to be seen but not heard, these spaces were where they did speak, about childbirth, grief, marriage, faith, and frustration. They gave advice. They passed down wisdom. They reminded each other that they weren't alone. If there's a lesson in this, it's that community doesn't have to be grand to be powerful. Sometimes it's built one visit, one kind word, one stitched square at a time. In the absence of modern connection, these women built something lasting and real, with no phone calls, no social media, just hearts open to one another. But not all women were satisfied with tradition. For some, community wasn't enough. They began to question the limits placed around them. Why couldn't they vote? Why couldn't they speak at town meetings or own land in their own name? And that's when something began to stir, quietly at first, then louder. Let's meet the women who took their domestic strength and transformed it into public change. In many 19th century households, education wasn't seen as a right for girls, it was a luxury. While boys were often sent to school to prepare for business, farming, or public life, girls were taught something else entirely: how to be good daughters, wives, and mothers. If a girl learned to read and write, that was often considered enough. Still, women craved knowledge, and many found their way to it, quietly, stubbornly, and with a hunger that no one could quite extinguish. Some learned to read from old Bibles or borrowed primers. Others listened intently while older siblings recited their lessons at the kitchen table. A few lucky girls attended one-room schoolhouses, sitting on wooden benches, memorizing poetry and copying letters by candlelight. But their schooling often ended early, at age 12 or 13, so they could help at home. Formal higher education for women was rare. Colleges were mostly closed to them. And even when a woman was well-read, her opinions were often dismissed as unfeminine. A woman could quote Shakespeare from memory, but still be told her place was in the kitchen. Yet books, when they could get them, opened windows. Novels by Jane Austen, essays by Emerson, even domestic guides by Catherine Beecher gave women not only stories but voices. Through reading, they found reflections of their own thoughts, frustrations, and dreams. A young woman reading alone on a porch swing may not have looked radical, but in her mind, she was crossing oceans. Consider Mary, a farmer's wife in rural Ohio. She had no formal education past childhood, but she treasured a worn copy of Pilgrim's Progress. Every night, after the house went quiet, she read by oil lamp, penciling notes in the margins. Those quiet hours were hers alone, a small rebellion of the mind. The lesson here is simple but powerful. Even when doors were closed, women found ways to open windows. They built inner worlds that were rich and sharp, even if the outside world didn't recognize their worth. And some of them, just a few at first, began to ask out loud what others only dared to think in private. Why are we not allowed to learn more? To vote? To speak? To be free? What began in quiet corners and borrowed books soon turned into movements, marches, and voices rising together. Let's meet the brave women who took their knowledge, their faith, their frustration, and used it to start a revolution. At first, the resistance didn't look like rebellion. It looked like letters written at midnight, quiet conversations in parlors, and pamphlets passed from hand to hand. But underneath the silence, something powerful was growing. A deep awareness that women were capable of more, and deserved more. In the 19th century, most women couldn't vote, couldn't own property once married, and couldn't speak in public without facing ridicule. But that didn't stop them. Instead, they took the tools they had, faith, education, resilience, and turned them into instruments of change. Many of the earliest reformers were born out of the same routines we've already seen: women who baked bread, raised children, and sewed clothes, but who also began asking hard questions. Why were women shut out of politics? Why were their voices ignored in churches and courts? Why was their labor invisible, yet essential? Some joined the temperance movement, advocating against alcohol abuse because they had seen its damage in their own homes. Others fought for the abolition of slavery, believing no one should be treated as less than human. And from those causes, something even bigger took root: the fight for women's rights. Think of Sojourner Truth, a formerly enslaved woman who traveled the country delivering fiery speeches about justice, faith, and equality. Or Elizabeth Cady Stanton, a mother of 7 who helped organize the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848, the first formal call for women's suffrage in America. Or Lucretia Mott, a Quaker and teacher who combined her belief in peace with a fierce demand for change. These were not women born into power. They were women who built power out of experience, out of pain, and out of the unshakable belief that things could be better. And they weren't alone. Thousands of everyday women, teachers, farmers' wives, factory workers, signed petitions, attended lectures, and stood together. Their names may not be in history books, but their courage laid the groundwork for everything that came after. The lesson here is this: change doesn't always begin with a shout. Sometimes, it begins with a whisper, a moment of saying, "This isn't right," and deciding to do something about it. The 19th century didn't see full equality, but it planted the seeds that would one day grow into the freedoms women have today. So the next time you hear about a protest, a vote, or a voice speaking up, you'll know it started long ago, in kitchens and churches, in letters and lectures, with women who were tired of being silent. And now, it's our turn to listen, to remember, and to carry their legacy forward. Now you've seen what most history books only skim over: the long, quiet, powerful days of 19th century women. They weren't just caretakers or background characters. They were the heartbeat of every home, the glue of every community, and the spark of future revolutions. From early mornings at the hearth to late-night reading by candlelight. From sewing circles to public rallies. These women lived full lives, rich with struggle, strength, and stunning resilience. And maybe, in their stories, we can see something of ourselves. Because even today, so much of women's work, whether it's emotional labor, caregiving, or quiet leadership, still goes unseen. But that doesn't make it any less powerful. So here's a question to carry with you. What part of your daily life would your great-great-grandmother be proud of? And what would you still fight to change? Leave a comment below and tell us. What surprised you most about 19th century women's lives? And if you found this glimpse into the past moving or meaningful, please tap like, subscribe, and share this video. Your support helps bring forgotten stories back into the light. Don't forget to stay tuned. We've got more untold chapters of history coming soon. You won't want to miss what's next.